So normally when I'm up here, I'm usually doing something that is a little more like this. That's my normal position. And you guys look a lot more like that, right? So this is a little different for me, and I wanted to give you some background into how I got to be standing up here as the founder of the Human Impact Lab at Concordia University and developing projects like the Climate Clock. So a lot of people don't know that I have this other secret life as a full-on geek. Now, it started a long time ago. I was living in New York City, and I was watching the curve of the music business go like this, and I was watching the curve of the internet go the opposite direction. And I got very interested in why these two lines were crossing. And I got obsessed with all things digital and the web, and that has led me to working on all kinds of different things behind the scenes as well as music. So for 5 years, I ran a social media aggregation startup. We were doing aggregated brandable streams on iPhone, Adobe Downloadable when that was a thing, and the iFrame. And this was just after Twitter launched. And I also write books on creativity and innovation, and I teach creativity, innovation, and technology to large companies and institutions, really talking about how to spark creativity within larger hierarchies. So for the past 20 years, my job has really been to apply creative thinking to many different disciplines. So the one thing that remains constant across all these verticals is how new technology is really changing everything about the world around us. It's changing the way we make things, but it's also changing the way we think. And it's actually changing the speed of ideas, because now everything's been cranked up, right? The way we make media, the way we consume media, and now everyone is their own little content engine. So for social impact, the question really becomes, in a world where ideas run like water, how do we make any idea have relevance and traction? And how do we make anyone really care about anything when things are moving so much faster? And that's even harder when you're talking about social impact, right? Things like big social data impact problems, things like climate change and the second machine age. So how do we make people care about these things that seem so intangible and vast? And I've talked to a lot of climate scientists over the years. In fact, I was hosting David Suzuki's birthday party right here. And he said something that I hear a lot of climate scientists saying, that they've been telling the same story to the same people the same way for 20 years, right? And if you look at what's just happened in the United States, we know that that's not working, right? So at the, like what do we even say about that, right? So at the Human Impact Lab, what we are trying to do is look at these big social impact problems, but through a different lens, and then tell a new story. So we are a creative studio and a nonprofit at Concordia University, and we work at the intersection of art, technology, and data. And we live by 3 basic principles. First, we engage modern storytellers, so artists, designers, game developers, interactive programmers, to really look at these problems from a new perspective and then to tell new stories. And then we work cross-vertically, trying to bring in partners from many different verticals, right, from across the spectrum: university, business, technology companies, government, and nonprofits. And finally, underneath it all, we employ startup methodology. So we really use startup methodology, but we apply it to the world of impact ideas. So minimal viable product, stage funding, fast iteration, and always thinking about the roadmap to scale. How do we drag these ideas out of private conversations and put them into public spaces? So we work on a lot of different projects, but today I'm going to talk about our 2 main focuses, which are really about the mass disruptions of our time, which are climate change and the second machine age, or artificial intelligence, robotics, and computer automation. But I want to begin with climate change and the development of the climate clock. So we all now know that the average global temperature going up 2 degrees is the point where temperature and the life on Earth becomes very, very difficult for all humans, right? That's the place where things get really, really awful for all of us. But if you research 2 degrees online, you'll find a lot about what happens at 2 degrees, but very little about when it's going to happen. And I thought that was crazy, because as a storyteller, the when is the most important part of the story. Because as humans, we don't measure our lives in temperature. We measure our lives in time. So if the average global temperature this year goes up 0.005 degrees, well, that really means nothing to me, because I really don't understand the metric, and I have no relation to that metric. But if we gain or lose 5 years this year, well, that's something that I understand, because I measure my life in years, so I know how old I will be, but more importantly, I know how old my kids will be, right? Time places climate change into a framework that we understand and care about. So time is one of the key metrics that we need to include if we want to make climate change relevant to humans. So with this concept, I got together with Dr. Damon Matthews at Concordia University, who's an amazing climate scientist. He gathered climate scientists from around the world, and they have actually done it. They have set the time of 2 degrees. Now, every year we have this growing group of climate scientists, and they get together and they analyze the latest data. And then we reset the time on the clock. And now we are starting to measure each year if we are gaining or losing time against 2 degrees. Now we can use the metric of time as a way to measure climate change. But the climate clock that you see up there is really just the shiny object, right? It's the front end. What I'm really interested in is what comes next. Because now that we've set the time of 2 degrees, we've drawn the line in the sand, now we can start to take all this other climate data that we already have and plug it into this relationship between temperature and time, right? Now we can start to see how data and policy are pushing time around rather than just temperature. So green energy by country, by continent, how does that affect the clock? Vegetarianism, a huge piece of the climate puzzle. How does it move time around? If we take the Paris Climate Agreement's COP21 and we do the math, it turns out that it just gives us 6 extra years on the clock. Now, what will Donald Trump's policies do to the time on the clock, right? And we've started to do the calculations. So the climate clock lives as an iframe, so it can be shared online, as a conference projection, as large-scale building projections. And we're starting to do these all over the world. We're doing them in places like South Korea, Spain, China, Germany. And the goal is, again, to inject the metric of time into the story of climate change. Now at the lab, we run a number of different climate programs. We're working on sea level rise gaming engines with companies like Autodesk, Illogica. We're working on a project with Lotto Quebec. We're working with nonprofits like Future Earth and the Bay Institute in San Francisco. So many different projects. And that's the Rising Seas with Autodesk. So you can, basically, on a touchable screen, you can go from the Earth to above your city, to your exact location that you're standing in, and then you can play with emissions and see what's going to happen to sea level rise in your location. This is the prototype, and we hope to be deploying these soon with the Bay Institute in San Francisco, at the San Francisco Airport, at Pier 39, and at Facebook as well, because Facebook will be underwater. And that might not be a bad thing. Sorry. And that brings us to our other major focus, and this is the other big disruption of our time, which is what we're really interested in, and that is the story of the second machine age, the intersection of artificial intelligence, robotics, and computer automation. So where climate change will disrupt everything about the planet that we live on, the second machine age will change everything about how we work and how we live, the very fabric of our society. And this is the other big data story that needs to be told. It's estimated that 45% of jobs in North America are going to be radically affected by automation within the next 5 years, right? So at the lab, we really want to tell the story of what this coming disruption means to people's lives. So for us, that starts with getting to people to understand the implications of the technology itself. So to do this, we're building a series of interactive installations for museums, conferences, and public spaces that people can actually play with and then start to understand what these technologies and concepts actually mean. Things like exponentiality, the doubling power of Moore's law, what it really means to how fast technology is advancing, machine learning and AI, what are predictive algorithms, competitive algorithms, cooperative algorithms, what is algorithmic control. And in robotics, we want to demonstrate things like robot-human interaction, cooperation, and competition. All the artificial intelligence installations are being built by my company, Humanize AI, and they will be project managed by the Human Impact Lab. But we're really interested in this interface between AI and human, digital and physical, right? So that's the essence of what we do at the Human Impact Lab. If you're interested, I hope you'll come and talk to us later and say hello and maybe get involved. Thank you very much.